On today's episode of The Credit Line, we are joined by Matt Mezger. Matt has been working with Uline for 9 years and is a credit assistant manager overseeing recruitment. In 2023, Matt won the NACM Emerging Leaders Award. Matt is married with 3 kids and their dog Lola, and he's a Chicago's Bear fan, which he then added, unfortunately. Lastly, one of Matt's goals is to visit every NFL and MLB stadium in the US. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, Matt, to the Credit Line podcast. So glad that you can be here on today's episode. Back again. I'm going to start that over. Let me try that one more time. Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for being on the Credit Line podcast. So glad that you could make it today. And why don't you just give us a quick introduction of who you are, what you do, those little things there.
Sure. Yeah. So, my name's Matt Mezger. I'm an assistant credit manager. I work for Uline Inc. We're a shipping supplies company based out of our headquarters is based out of Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. So I'm been doing this now for about 9 years, kind of overseeing a handful of different groups within our department over the years, and currently oversee our recruiting team. And then we're actually going to be branching off into starting to sell internationally. So that'll be something I'll be heading up here in the next 6 to 12 months or so.
So just things are moving fast and moving forward as you would hope with any business, is that you wouldn't just stay stagnant, that you would moving forward and trying new things, and going international is a really big step, as you have to deal with a whole lot of different things
Definitely.
for different laws and countries and regulations and things like that. So good on you, but also good luck.
Yeah.
And as the one question that I always ask is, how did you get into credit? I think most of the stories are you just kind of been jumped upon you and just us kind of a surprise, but I want to hear exactly how you got into credit, if you don't mind going into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So my story is a little bit similar to that. I do remember the day. Actually, I was so when I started at Uline, I worked in our accounts receivable team, and some companies keep those are that functions the same. At our company, that they're separate functions. And I was sitting at my desk, just plugging away, calling customers, and the director of our credit department came and was like, "Hey, you know can we can you come talk with me for a few minutes?" And I had seen her before. I'd only been at the company for a couple months, so I was still kind of figuring out my way, and um, you know, didn't really know her that well. She pulls me into an office. I'm like, "Oh man, like I just started here. Like, what did I do?" Just one of those thoughts. And she sits me down and she's like, "Hey, we've seen your work. We really like what you're doing, and we'd like to offer you to come over to our credit department." And I don't have much of a finance background. I have an economics degree and I have a little bit of background with personal banking, but most of my background is actually on the criminal justice side. And so I wasn't really familiar with credit myself, or I knew what a credit card was, but that was about it. And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm really just starting to get, figure out what my current job is, and I'm starting to get into a rhythm." And she's like, "Well, like, give it some thought, let us know. But we'd really like you to come over." And I, went home and I talked to my wife, and, kind of looked into it more and understood what the position was and the opportunities there. And went back the next day and said, "Okay, hey, sign me up. Let's do it." And yeah, that was probably one of the best decisions I think I've ever made. Yeah, it's been close to 9 years now since then. And, uh, you know, couldn't have made a better decision, I feel like, in my opinion.
So you were there for literally just months, and they already offered you that position, seeing that, I guess, a talent or the skills that you possessed. And it's awesome when you have leadership that can do that. And see what other employees or their employees have, and be able to like kind of take that out. Yeah, it is a scary moment whenever few months in and you're already having your boss kind of call you into their office and you're like, ah, man, like I screw up. And I'm glad that it wasn't the case, and that you took the position, and like you said, 9 years later, you're still going along with it and learning and doing stuff. I find it very interesting that you said you're more into the whole criminal justice thing. Not going to go too much into that, but Is there any way that somehow that part of your life has now entered into your credit industry, or profession? Because 'Cause I'd be really curious how, like, subconsciously maybe you take some of that stuff along with you.
Yeah, so I worked, I have an associate's in criminal justice, and I worked at as a corrections officer actually for about 3 years, and one of the biggest things I took away was the communication piece. So you see things on TV and how jails are, and that's not how it is in the in the real world. Most of your job is talking to people, and you're and having to use verbal judo, literally something that we studied to kind of tell them things they maybe don't wanna hear, but in ways that will, hopefully get them to go along with what you're doing, and that's literally a lot of what we do in credit. We have orders on hold for customers that they are, not pleased about. Maybe they have past due balances, maybe their credit limits exceeded, and by the time we've gotten to the phone call with the customer, we've typically done as much as we can to see if we can process their order. So when we get to those calls can be pretty difficult sometimes with customers being upset, not maybe understanding things. And a lot of how I had to communicate in a face-to-face situation in a place like a jail actually carried over than to, being able to be direct, but also provide kind of, a level of understanding to the situation for them. And that actually carried through. And to this day, I still reference things from stories from back then that have it still impact me today.
Yeah, I could imagine, like, especially when you're approving credit or not approving credit, how having the right kind of language and tone, I mean, you're not dealing necessarily with criminals, and so some might take offense to, like, why or why not, and this and that, but knowing how to have the words and, like, the way you carry yourself with those words as well. Something that I'm still working on, making sure, like, how to be communicatively, like, effective and, um, knowing how to do that the best way and what industry or what, circumstance it might be. So I find that super cool. Very different than a lot of other people in their backgrounds, not necessarily coming from the criminal side of things, but knowing that anything helps. Everything is somehow connected in, the world that we're living in. And whether it's like the skills or the experiences, and I'm sure you've had some tough experiences, or challenging ones when you were doing that job, and you're probably coming into this role. I wasn't sure if you were anticipating having maybe similar kind of like responses.
Yeah, when I first started in collections, I was fortunately, I had that buffer between from working at, the jail to I did, did banking for about a year and a half, so that helped me kind of smooth out some of my edges in terms of communication before coming over. But yeah, some of my first calls with customers, they're apologizing for, the invoices and taking care of payment. I was like, "Okay." Like, "You don't have to apologize. That's okay. Let's get this taken care of and get it going on the accounts receivable side." And on the credit side, I've definitely had some difficult conversations. Unfortunately, that comes with the territory. And, again, I think going back to some of what I learned and training I had definitely helped navigate those calls, whereas, maybe sometimes people might get upset and maybe wanna shut down. It's, cooler heads prevail. We're the ones that, need to relay this information, and ultimately, they're not upset with you personally. They're upset with the situation, and it may be something that's out of their control, and that's what they're upset with. And I think understanding where the other side is coming from is another part that plays into that communication piece too. It's not always, you have to do what we say because we need you to do this. Then, you're talking to a human being on the other end, and you want to make sure that they understand the situation, but also, you know, maybe they've got some frustrations that they're dealing with that we don't know about. And, trying to navigate through that can be tricky, but it's definitely been beneficial to have that experience.
Now, kind of on the same topic, I don't know, you kind of touched upon it, like, as you're entering into the whole position. What is, like, one or maybe a couple short little ones of, like, the interesting experiences that you were not prepared to encounter when you first started out in the credit, role? I know there's a lot of stories of, like, oh, I didn't know, like, maybe that I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that's what it entailed. Because a job listing could be one thing with the job description, and then you get in there and you're like, whoa, this is really different, or it exceeds your expectations in a really good way. So I'm curious to know if there's any fun little stories that kind of come along with that as you started out within your role.
Yeah, I've always been a person who's tried to just be really open to, the opportunity and just kind of absorb, what's happening, and really try to take in as much information I can to try and learn, as best I can to kind of, uh, you know, really master what I'm doing. And I'd say one of the biggest things, in at least at our company, again, you spend a lot of time on the phones with customers when you initially start out. We analyze more on an order to order basis, and so you're calling customers, you're taking incoming calls, and I would say so. We've Fraud has been a big topic in the credit industry over the last couple years, and unfortunately, it's we're not immune to that. We've been dealing with that for quite a while, and some of the conversations that I've had with customers who I'll call them customers in quotes because they were trying to order from us but ultimately not pay. And when you catch those customers, when the order gets placed, and uh, it's a very sweet feeling to know to get them on the phone and say, hey, this order's on hold. We need this and this. And um, some of those calls have definitely gone. Those have been probably some of the more interesting sideways conversations I've had. I've had people threaten lawsuits. Uh, and again, I mean, we're shipping, Tide Pods to a house. Like we're not, we're not looking really at a legitimate business here. And so those have been fun. Just kind of, there was one situation where I was on the phone with this customer and she just kept going in circles, just kept going in circles. And, I wasn't really sure if I should disconnect the call. Our company's really big on customer service, really big on that. That's really what we do. And so I'm on the phone with this customer, and my director at the time, he could hear the conversation going on from his office, and he sends me a message, and he was like, "Fraudster?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he sent him the order number, he looked at it, and he just goes, "Disconnect." And I put in my notes per, director, such and such, disconnected call, and ended the call. I just thought that was so funny that he, you know, was sitting, probably 15, 20 feet away, and then all of a sudden I get a message from him like, "Yeah, we can cut this call out." So, uh yeah, we've made a lot of strides in telling our analysts, "Hey, if you get to a certain point, you have to disconnect these calls, do that." But that was a one of those unique situations for sure.
This podcast is brought to you by Careers in Credit. If you're an employer looking for top talent, or if you're seeking exciting career opportunities in the credit industry, Careers in Credit has you covered. They offer a range of outstanding job listings from excellent employers ready to hire. As an employer, you can effortlessly create and edit job postings, email your listings to relevant job seekers, and set up resume search alerts to find the perfect candidates for your team. Plus, you can view and print reports and statistics to keep track of your hiring progress. If you're on the lookout for your next career move, explore the vast array of opportunities available at Careers in Credit. So, get connected today by visiting careersincredit.org, and your next great hire or career opportunity starts here. Yeah, that's a common, I don't want to say common, but a reoccurring thing now, especially even in like a lot of the webinars that we host here, or the just the different articles that are written about fraud in the credit industry. And fraud is, I know it's not just this industry, it's any industry that anyone could take advantage to get money or whatever. And I don't know how much you guys implement any technologies that would help mitigate that. Like if there's any automation, or I know the AI is the big word, whatever that might be, or is it just, hey, we're doing best practices, something seems fishy, like we train our team to kind of see the red flags. And I'm just curious because as someone who is really big into tech, and it's emerging in our world every day in leaps and bounds. I'm curious to know if there's anything on your guys' end that you guys utilize to help mitigate that, or just, as a tool, for the
Sure.
team.
Yeah, so when I started out, we had some basic, tools that we could use, so, uh but for the most part, it was, you kind of learned when you see it, you know it type fraud. We called it your fraud feelers, getting those out when an order came out that just didn't sit right. Since then, we have developed definitely some more technologies. We use a homegrown tool that we built, which helps basically determine. It looks at a multitude of factors, IP address, things like that. I mean, I think at least 15 or 20 different factors it's looking at, all really from our customer uh, data and helping determine how likely an order may or not be fraud. So, and it's gone through a few iterations. It's got more machine learning in it than it has. We don't have it. We're not quite using AI with it, but uh, it's definitely come a long way. We've had it for probably at least 4 or 5 years, I want to say, and it's really helped the team kind of streamline some of the decision making. It's a little bit less of the gray area because a lot of credit is operating in that gray area. This helps cut some of that out. And while it's not a firm, if it's this score, then yes, it's fraud. But if you see a higher fraud score, you're most likely like, okay, yeah, this is really looking like fraud. So that's been a huge help for us. We also use a third party company to help with credit card transactions as well. So they help, and they have their database of customers. We kind of operate in the retail section in a way, to a certain degree, even though we're B2B. And they've been a huge asset as well for helping minimize the number of orders that we have to look at and make the decisions on. And for the most part, they're coming back with sometimes stronger decisions on orders, more accurate decisions than maybe we would have come up with just looking at the orders ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Knowing that the whole technology side of things are, it's ironic because sometimes it's used to commit fraud, and sometimes it's used to detect and mitigate that. Um, and again, I know AI is a hot marketing word, even though, like you said, machine learning and all that, and it's really that, not so much the artificial intelligence. And to have 4 or 5 years of that thing running and learning and updating and keeping things, current. It's really cool to hear. I'm just someone who always loves those kind of case studies and hearing about like real life situations outside of a textbook. So if you ever want to talk about this afterwards, I'm always good. Always interested. Though to get now focus more into the actual credit career part of things, this is a question I'm gonna ask everybody is who would you say credit is for? A lot of people, it says people who are sociable, who like to solve problems and kind of get yourself out there. And that might be something that you still say similarly, but I wanted to know if there's something more or more specific that you can add to it.
Sure. I will definitely say that the first thing I'd agree with is the problem solving side of things. When I initially went to school, my ultimate goal was to be a detective, and then didn't realize that what I'd be doing is similar to detective work, kind of having to find information. So if you are, you know, like that type of route, I'd say it's definitely beneficial. It's good to have a familiarity with being able to talk to people. I don't think you necessarily have to be social to a certain extent. Uh, I so I would say we have people in our department that range in degree of, how social they are on an individual basis, but being able to communicate clearly to the customers, I think is a skill set that's, I'd say, a little bit different, than that. And for us, we do hire quite a bit of people fresh out of college. So we're able to kind of help them get the ball rolling on some of their skill sets that they may need for other roles. So uh, FP&A, financial planning and analysis, is a big role that a lot of people want coming out of college. And for those type of roles, you typically need to be pretty well versed in financial analysis and maybe having more technical skills like you mentioned. We use SQL and Power BI in some of our dashboards and reporting. Credit can be kind of that initial step to learn some of those things. We actually went through a kind of a development process with our HR team to develop to come up with core skills that we feel like you need to be successful in your role. And so we're kind of an in between accounts receivable and FP&A is kind of where I'd put us at. And we looked at the skill sets they had on either side and looked to see where we fit in. And one of those that stood out was the financial analysis piece, where uh, if you're in FP&A, it's more of an expected skill set to have, where in credit, that's something that we don't expect you to have from day one, but at least to kind of understand, hey, like if you looked at financials, you know you're looking at financials, and then we can really help you develop those skill sets. So unfortunately, I don't have too much different of an answer to that, but I will say one of the biggest pieces, though, is developing that financial acumen. And if you are looking for that as a longer career path, credit is an excellent opportunity to really cut your teeth. For example, I mentioned before I have an economics degree. I took one finance class in school, so I really didn't have that background going into the role, and learned pretty much all of my financial analysis skills on the job. I was able to take some courses through NACM, plug for you guys there. And so that really helped enforce some of the information. But, you know, 80, 90% of of what you do, you're going to learn on the job. And that was really one of the big things was developing that skill set.
Yeah, you mentioned the education, but before I get into that, it is you said that, "Oh, yeah, well, I don't have that much to add to what other people have said," and I think that's actually pretty awesome because it already covers so much, and like you said, it's like detective work, and every time I hear detective work, I think of Batman, but, um, a lot of people might disagree with me, but that's just where my mind goes, and I'm not necessarily in, like, the credit world the way that you are, but even for me, that sounds interesting. It sounds intriguing, and all the stories that I've heard, and just to know that, like, how to operate as a credit manager, credit professional is to, communicate effectively and know how to put the pieces together to solve the puzzle. And that may be only two things that I mentioned, but that covers so many different little other aspects and areas, which I think a lot of people do find fascinating and do enjoy. Unfortunately, is just credit in the industry and the profession is almost like hidden. It's like that hidden gem, and but we want people to know more about it, and that's why we're doing the podcast to kind of bring light to all areas and walks of the tenureship, if you want, within the industry, from beginning and starting out new to someone who's been there for, I don't know, 30, 35 years. But that was really good, and I'm glad that you added to that, to anyone who might have questions or concerns about, well, what is it and why does it matter? And who is it for? And I really think it's almost for anyone who's willing to, put in that work and learn on the go and really step out of the comfort zone. Because a lot of times I think people want to have a nice job that's kind of tell me what to do. I go home and I come back, tell me what to do again. And whereas I think someone like me is also someone who likes a lot of variability, within a consistent, like, job role, if that makes sense. So, um, just
You
looking
make
at
a
my
good
notes
point there.
here. Yeah,
Sorry,
sure, go
just
ahead.
you mentioned about, the variability, and to this day, one of the things I talk to with our new analyst is learning. I learn something new almost every day. Uh, it, I, you know, like you said, there's people who've been doing this 30, 40 years, and it's been awesome to get to meet some of them and learn some of their knowledge. And in our day to day, what we learn, and really no 2 days are the same. Uh, you know, as a when you're starting out and you're doing more of the work of developing your analytical skills, your days can be a little bit similar with handling phone calls and working orders. And as you move more into the management piece, it definitely varies quite a bit from day to day. But I'm one of those people that enjoys that as well. I don't want to just sit and do, this isn't definitely not a role for somebody who wants that. Being creative is, a piece you wouldn't think would apply to a role like this, but because we operate in such a unique space that uh, you know, outside the box thinking is really going to help you, you know, kind of advance your career, because there's no two ways to two people might look at the same account and come up with two people might look at the same account and make two separate decisions, and they're both valid decisions. So thinking outside the box in that way is really huge. And again, that's another thing I think that's beneficial for those who are looking for something like this.
Yeah, creativity doesn't necessarily have to be like a, can paint with a brush. Sometimes there's like an analytical creativity. There's a way to organize things that are complex kind of creativity. Um, I mean, if you can paint with a brush and do that too, that's cool, but that's not really. I think people misunderstand the word creativity and they put it more just towards the arts, which of course that is creativity, but it's how you take any problem and how do you go about solving it. And I wanted to touch upon the education part. As you mentioned, you had a little bit of the education here at NACM Connect, and I just and not you know to kind of pat us on the back or anything here, but how would you say, like, for someone who is starting off in credit, like, the benefits of getting the education, not necessarily just from us, but in general, like, how crucial is that to their role, and how much does it add to, the things that they're doing?
Yeah, I think what it helps with is it can bring some of that build some of that gap that you would get from experience, is one of the biggest things. So, I mentioned some of my education. I didn't have some of those classes in my schooling, so I took them through NACM to help, kind of develop, some a better understanding of different aspects of what the credit department is. So it was hugely beneficial to me. I mean, the instructors that the group utilizes have all been great, and they're coming in with real world experiences and being able to provide, not just the textbook thing, but really applying it to what these kind of things look like in the real world. I think the education is tailored to that. We're not just operating in a textbook; we're operating in the real world while taking these courses. So I think it's beneficial in that way. I think you know, taking the time to get, designations and things like that. I have 2 of them. I have my CCRA and my CBA, and, what it opens in terms of what else is out there in the credit world. Every company does things differently, and we're no exception to that. We pride ourselves on doing things a little bit differently than other companies, and when I look at, a class like Credit Business Principles is one I always call back to. The Really how it helps understand structure of what a credit department is, top to bottom, understanding some of the laws that you're impacted by, understanding, uh, you know, different things like liens and getting into those different topics where maybe certain companies don't deal in those areas, that it exposes you that information to just help you make better, well-rounded decisions. It gives you more tools in your tool belt, again, to kind of solve some of those problems, to help you think outside the box by saying, okay, well, we've never done this before, but hey, I took this in a class 6 months ago or, 2 years ago at NACM, and we actually covered this topic, so I can call back to that and apply it to, something that's happening today.
Education's good. Then,
100%.
100% it's good. You mean you get a well-roundedness of the role that you're doing, and you're not, stabbing in the dark. You have a good understanding and grasp of what's going on. I was just as you were saying all that, a thought had coming into my mind of like, I wonder how diverse the credit, like, say, department in a company is, like, in the sense of career background is, because it always seems like, well, it's not what I expected, to go into, because I was going into this thing or to that thing. And sometimes, like, the finance, degrees that kind of go into credit. It's a little more, on the nose, but I mean, still different. But then you have people who are, say, like a history major or this and that. It's like I'm curious to know those backgrounds and just to see how many different people come into that industry, into that, department versus like the marketing department and this, accounting department. Usually people in those departments already have the degrees for those respective departments. Um, so that was just a thought of mine as you were talking. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can pull a survey and be like, yeah, where did you actually, go to school for? And look where you are now. And isn't it better?
Right, yeah, no, that's a really good point, and while we do look more so for finance degrees, to get for us, it's again, we kinda look at it as what's the growth opportunity for them within our company as well. So the finance degree kind of helps in that regard in terms of what they could do from a growth perspective. If they're looking for, you know, they're crazy like me and are willing to do credit, for the rest of their career. You really don't have to have that background. I You mentioned history degree. Someone I worked with very closely for many years in our credit department. He's a history major, and we had someone, she worked in credit briefly. I believe she has a sociology degree. So I mean, there's all different backgrounds. You're definitely right on that. We actually have somebody who has a marketing degree in our credit department as well. So while I'd say a good portion of our some of our newer team members are a little bit more on the finance accounting side of things, we do have a pretty broad range. I think one of our managers has a math degree, which is, can apply to finance for sure, but definitely you're not pigeonholed to one type of, education to be able to do this job.
Right. And I'm gonna have to talk to my peers here to figure out how to get a survey of the different companies that we are partnered with and things like that for me, because I think that's an interesting statistic showing that you don't have to have the exact parallel or direct degree or whatever to get into credit, though of course having something similar helps. But knowing that all the stories I've heard is I wasn't expecting to be here and now I am and I love it. So I mean that's a great testimony to the credit industry. The last thing that I wanted to just touch on is for someone who is going into credit, someone new, what is some advice that you would give to them?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest things and is being open to making mistakes. Uh, no one got where they're at without, you know, I call it, the whole failing upwards. Like I didn't get where I'm at without making mistakes, but the big thing is learning from those mistakes and being open to feedback from others. And it doesn't always have to be from your boss, maybe a peer, maybe even somebody who's newer than you. Learning from those around you is big, and understanding that you're not, again, operating in such a gray space. You may think you have 95% of the information and you make a decision. Well, it turns out you missed a whole other pie of information in your analysis, and learning from that is, I think, key. Um, you know, I've set credit limits and looked back and said, "What was I thinking?" And had the support. Having support from your management is definitely key to help learning from those things. But I would say that's one of the biggest areas, is that understanding you're going to make mistakes and it's okay, and just really being willing to learn from those, and try not to do them again.
No, that's so good. Is I know for me is learning about from and about your mistakes sometimes is a hard pill to swallow. A lot of pride that can come from that. It's great to have managers who know how to handle those kind of people like me, to help you step forward and move forward and realize that as long as you take the lesson, you learn from it, you'll make another mistake about something else later.
Guaranteed.
Get get good at learning from the mistake. I think that's really good, not just for the credit professional, but for anybody who's doing anything. But I loved our conversation. There's so many different things that I felt like you expanded on from other conversations that I've had, and I'm excited to see the next person expand upon what you've been saying and things like
Yeah.
that. And I think that's a really great thing about our credit industry is that there's a lot of support and a lot of great minds, pick the brains of and get insight about these kind of things. And hopefully my job is to bring the world a better understanding of what the credit industry is, because again, I don't think a lot of people do, and I would love for them to know. I'm someone who didn't know anything and now I'm learning a great deal, and part of that are these conversations. And so thank you, Matt, for taking the time to be here. And if there's anything else that you wanted to add, go ahead. For sure want to hear that, but if not, I'd love to conclude the episode.
Oh, I think that covers really everything I had. Just good luck with with these. I'd, would love to come back on if you ever, wanted to have another conversation. This was really
Absolutely.
good, and I agree. I think we need to get people to know what this is, and really be able to get the good people in here because there's tons of opportunity in the credit world. You just got to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan.